the United States has reduced its military forces in the Arab states of the Persian Gulf by adopting a brigade minus force posture, removing land-based strike aircraft, and eliminating carrier deployments. Advantage 1: U.S.-Iran cooperation. U.S. forces divide the region into antagonistic zones, preventing development of endogenous solutions to regional stability. New Sabian and Siberia. 15: the President foreign forces returned the region to two zones, one that sides with the U.S. and another with Iran. The President American forces disrupt the relationship between Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Turkey, and Egypt. The general consensus around has been that neither country benefits from different policy and foreign policy, and the Republic is not based on one person but on a collective view. Except in few cases, leaders always were a decision made by the Security Council Committee is inclined to put an end to animosity. The American United States. Khomeini is a hardliner. The plan means that it gets Rouhani and Khomeini on the same boat.
Okay, gets them on the same boat. That makes sense.
Yeah.
What are
Well, that's one of the arguments.
Your evidence also cites disruptions that are occurring between the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Egypt, etc. Where do you read a piece of evidence that indicates that the reduction in military presence would be sufficient to appease all of these different places and resolve
So in the context of GCC states, I think the Gupta evidence and the Guzansky evidence, as well as the Freeman evidence and Rothner say all of those. Right, so one of the reasons is because it forces the Gulf states to take up their own security architecture rather than free riding the United States.
But where does your evidence take that next claim that indicates them taking up their own security measures?
The Guzansky card says
resolves tensions between the countries.
So between which countries?
Between the countries that I've just talked about.
Saudi Arabia, the relationships between all of those countries are sort of unique. So can you between Saudi Arabia and Iran, our Gupta evidence indicates that rapprochement is facilitated by the absence of U.S. troops, which forces Iran and Saudi Arabia to cooperate over regional security issues like Syria and Yemen. In the context of Iraq and Saudi Arabia,
all right, that's fine. Scenario two. Where do you think you have a piece of reverse causal evidence that indicates that a reduction in U.S. military presence will stop S-300s from being delivered?
I think the end of the first card, the end of this card says that Iran will stay its independent track, willing to expand relations to the one that accepts its regional role in the triangle of U.S. Iran and Russian relations.
Where does that make a reverse causal claim about them stopping?
It solves the reason that they need asymmetric tactics, and the defense news card says that although contracts have been approved, they haven't actually implemented them.
I'm so scared. Okay, it's done.
That solves all. And that solved everything.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
It's 4 off, and then the advantage.
I still haven't gotten it, but
Weird. I got it. Oh, because I sent it to my other email to a different email chain. I got a new email since we rated you last, so I'm just
I'm sorry about that.
No, I just didn't want to. It's confusing. It's not that big a deal, so. You shouldn't be sorry. There's so many people that are like, but I sent it. Okay, it should be sent now.
Got it.
Should have never gotten an email.
Four, then
too far in my life to do that. Too far. Yeah, 4 and then advantage. Everybody good?
Yeah.
Topicality interpretation. Topical affirmatives must significantly reduce military personnel or troop bases and operations are distinct from your presence is measured by some troops personnel in 06. U.S. military presence measured by the number and shares of active military personnel. The information is filed with the U.S. Department of Defense and violation of the affirmative significantly reduces forces, not troops that prefer interpretation aids, limits bases, or forces only accessible to topic each facility maintains its own research base, whereas military personnel are discussed as collective entities and their interprets for dispatch based off of troop removal and posture or doctrine interpretation across the topic. It includes presence on shore space, assets, novas, and political ties, Kerpak, and working sub. Posture can be an interconnected set of components for debates of forces overseas spaces and facilities global attack forces based on the U.S. territory or space, building logistics infrastructure forces with internet rapid base consumption forces in the global sea. 3. Whenever these rest on the support of these longer arrangements such as 3. It is insolvent and B is bidirectionality where more troops can be added and transferred to other bases and C is education to presence of the cracks military presence literature closing are removing forces loose on core questions of literature base and T is putting posture word on the Africa pitting interpretation should be filtered Counterplan. The United States federal government should propose a multilateral security forum that includes the GCC countries, the United States, China, the European Union, India, Iran, Iraq, and Japan, and Russia, and launch a diplomatic campaign that promotes the creation of the forum within the next 6 months and maintain its military presence in the Arab states of the Persian Gulf. And the President of the United States should give a speech that articulates a long-term vision of political, economic, and security cooperation in the Gulf and explains the importance of a multilateral security forum. The plan solves the Counterplan solves Gulf security dilemmas, builds cooperation ties, and creates a security structure that will facilitate U.S. withdrawal from the region. Wahar and Solosky in 15. At the heart of the region's security development and culture, nations Iran seek the departure of the U.S. forces while the Gulf area representation wanted the United States to balance the Iranian posture that empowered the nuclear committee presents the first step toward creating a security order in the Gulf that would improve the West should be diverting our Gulf routines and facilitate lessening of the U.S. military commitment. The GCC provided platform for the dialogue on security option of new and inclusive regional security dialogue would accommodate the U.S. region stretching for balance together the more stable security regime with less interference. The dependence on U.S. military presence, U.S. people should evaluate their readiness for defeating multilateral political security issues that include the GCC countries, the United States, China, European Union, India, Iran, Iraq, and Japan, and Russia, and realistic long-term formal rules of the security structure to set challenges the most effective way to launch a new dialogue. The United States is diplomatic campaign to achieve the increased sense of democracy to release initiative for the goal of beginning over the next 6 months. The President of the Security States should be instructed for the long-term security, political, and economic use in the Gulf that includes a more effective regional security organization. And the Counterplan maintains a careful balance of the status quo military ties and a new direction for Gulf diplomacy solves the disad or Harley and Salsky in 15. The United States President claimed the Gulf and fierce about the nuclear agreement repackaging existing U.S. security clause. The GCC countries and military partners and arms sales and capacity building are essential elements of U.S. engagement with the GCC partners. If the United States focuses only on reassuring its Gulf partners, they will continue their dual track policy of restricting U.S. commitments while taking action to deploy stability on the same time. Tries to choose programs that be necessary to protect U.S. important to the Gulf. It's now suggesting U.S.-led perversion on a new security regime for the reduce Gulf state dependence on military budget, reducing long-term stability and achieving durable power equality could also help in central government and other internal reform for the Gulf countries. Need institutional building will cut the United States to elevate the diplomatic game review, reducing the development to create the police without strong U.S. leadership market there. U.S. GCC increasing military cooperation now key to solve war and deter Iran nuclear deal to doesn't stop agency and France pressure in 15. The United States and Gulf allies agreed to deepen their military partnership and counter external threats in the face of Iran's relentlessly recent reforming our commitment to security. The United States is ready to work jointly with the GCC member states to enhance security operation on the arms sales and counterterrorism, marine security, cybersecurity, and missile defense. The United States GCC member states oppose and will work together to counter Iran's activities in the recent and almost completely terrorist Gulf policies. The United States is not turning its back on them even if it's trying to defer to deal with that Tehran, and the plan causes the GCC to lash out against Iran. Polk in 15. In the absence of American military involvement, the GCC become threatened in their attempt to lash out the Gulf Arabs have never seen the United States is so disengaged and feel they have to take an exceptional action to see if it's possible about to do so because the United States will be embracing Iran rather than deterring or defeating it. In the absence of strong American pushing back on Iran, the GCC developed models attack on their own, and the impact is Middle East war miscalculation that escalates withdrawal uniquely triggers it. Bucci in 15. The Saudis are out of the Pakistanis who have nuclear weapons and a huge amount of firepower concentrated in a small region that could blow up in a major conflagration because America is no longer nuclear the world and has split the region. That security guarantee the rebel threat of hardpower has enough to keep our friends confident has changed. The president has a reason to fear U.S. withdraw from the region and has a right of friends to demand together to defend themselves against Iran and the rest of the Middle East. More explosive and unpredictable than ever, the major Middle Eastern border could spill across the globe. Nation's policies have fueled uncertainty and superpowers are always defined and miscalculation can be cataclysmic. And the K. U.S. history is neither neutral nor innocent. Established a racial connection between the elimination of indigenous peoples in the Middle East to Tucson and 11. Jackson in an incursion that kicked off the First Settlement War in the course of making their case for historically the symbols and Al-Qaeda Jackson actions were setting inflation to distributing gross inequality and preventing movements. The U.S. will have to report the first to survive the average standard of justice. These represent considered the dismayed by the military prosecutors backward dive into racist revision and history seminal efforts to defend themselves and invading genocide army could be on terms of buffalo chicken on the geonistic military historian or prosecutors do not view Jackson's action as an exemplar of moral rights but as a legal precedent market there. And the alternative is a disidentification with affirmative in favor of a feminist queer color critique. Driscoll in 10. Disidentification is hermeneutical performance of decoding culture from the perspective of minorities, simple use dismount respect to representational hierarchy for Native people statutes, strong comparison against colonialism, issues for the clean policy strategies as strategy culture strategies part of the national struggles, non-assimilation move against golden powers that dissolve Native sovereignty, Shakespeare critiques social glory studies a lot more complex analysis of nature while according to critiques of hierarchy from nationalism and queer studies offers something that pervades the mastery argument with Native people are erased, our homelands are seen as occupied by golden powers. This brings us to the question of whether decolonial strategies are part of scholarly approach to studies spread culture integrate indigenous and decolonial theories into their critiques market their case. No escalation, no vital interest for great power war in Central Asia 6. Central Asian security threats have become more complex than during the 19th century. The Guardian and social actors involved in the recent division of what we do. Bringing American statute and conscious influence is not challenged by the electricity to Russia and the US and the three great powers that share. So, state nations face the emergency Arizona dropped out to the major multilateral security guarantees and security fund opportunity for cooperative diplomacy and no impact to Russia-Turkey war. Their black blanket 2K evidence is too old to be relevant to current conflicts and says any tensions between Russia and Turkey, ISIS, and Syria make this impact inevitable and no Russian war army and 311. Putin is not acknowledging Putin. Large moderate on Ukraine relation to the US and Putin is well aware that Russian implementation to contend with United Britain and Putin is not a creditor for our part of the rebels to be defeated and no US drawing with Russia. Robinson 14. Obama has resolved our military extortion in Ukraine. We would not go to war for Russia. Imagine a watching invasion of the Ukraine Americans have military and calling it if circumstances arise in the future there will be the US honor security guarantees. It doesn't take a while for us to the gap loophole. Obama can simply the use of forces necessary as he did with Syria and no Israel strikes it will escalate El Husseini in 13. Israel attack on Iran. This is the country, especially if you have new coalition war terrorizes Israelis and Israel principle launching a unilateral attack on the and no Israel attack would deter Iran as Israel military and intelligence chiefs leads the strike on Iran is about to do. Obama had told Israel to wait for sanctions. Iran makers are aware that initiating a war would lead to intervention and no solvency there. But evidence doesn't make any reverse causal claims about increase U.S.-Iran ties causing Iran to be less influenced by Russia. Just that Iran could use better Western ties to stave off Russian influence, but not that they would want to. And no escalation of conflict ever. No state destroys their economies. Nigal Tamali in 15. And now to read there's a return for warning about escalation of full-blown war that is nobody dangerous both of our army and Azerbaijan want to pursue have come to help and recover from the devastating effects of war. Azerbaijan making money from the oil and gas. Oil and gas is going to be there for the third time. Karabakh is going to be there forever. Their church is getting money for the oil and gas and to modernize around their military market there. And the status quo stalls Iran and GCC are running against ISIS. Karami in 14. Reports between Tehran and Iran happening on the sidelines. Foreign Minister Zarraf met his Saudi counterparts. So this will be the first page of a new chapter in relation to this almost stated commitment to cooperate. Iran and Saudi Arabia were hunting for the threats of regional ties with the neighboring countries. The common threat to regional security makes it necessary regional ties have decided to occur disputes near the gap because do not mean no ground for cooperation. And cancel S 300s. The app is not reverse causal. Their evidence cites Iran's conventional military, how it depleted because of decades of sanctions and their terrible military means they would go to Russia because the U.S. would not sell them arms as a plan. And S-300 cells are locked in Tina 15. Hussein said that Russia has agreed to begin to deliver its advanced air defense system to Iran by the end of the year. The delivery of the S-300s finalized after Russia repeated its embargo on Iran. And we have been trained to defeat them for 10 years. They are annoying but can't be defeated. Hinadi in 15. In NATO, we have studied their training to counter for years, but we're not scared of it. Argument it.
Very good.
Yeah.
The status.
Status quo is always an option.
Can you kick blanks?
No.
Okay, so can I talk about the second weary card that you read? It says, a high-profile U.S. role in setting up the new security forum will be greeted with suspicion and any plan will be dead on arrival if it is seen as made by America. The counterplan has the President of the United States give its support. Why doesn't this
give its support, not mandate anything.
You have the U.S. propose a multilateral security initiative and have the U.S. be a part of it. Weary says that the U.S. being a part of it makes it dead in the water.
Weary does not say being a part of it. The line you just read says it is if they lead the act, which they don't.
So,
they won't lead the discussion.
Which part of the counterplan has the U.S. not lead the act?
It's a multilateral security forum.
So who else leads the act?
Nobody is leading. It's a multilateral
forum. The United States federal government propose it. Why is that not perceived as the U.S. doing it?
Because they're proposing it, like they don't actually make it codified. Other states do.
Okay, fine. So the GCC states versus Iran, who gets like the say yes, say no on what happens as a result of their multilateral conversations?
Sorry, what was the question?
Like who gets the say yes, say no vote?
They obviously all get a say yes.
What do you mean they all do? Like, there's a bunch of GCC states, and it's viewed as a de facto alliance against Iran and the status quo. Why would they not view it as that after the plan?
As a
No, I understand to the counterplan. I'm asking after the counterplan, in the multilateral forum, imagine if Iran wants to do something and that all the GCC states just vote no against Iran. Why does that solve cooperation?
I don't understand your question because I don't think that's relevant to the counterplan. Obviously, as long as the GCC all agree, then...
So the Lashow DA,
so.
it says that the GCC needs military cooperation to deter Iran. If Iran feels like it's being contained by the GCC and the U.S., what incentive do they have to cooperate?
They don't feel like they're being contained.
You've made an argument about deterrence. What's the distinction there?
What's the distinction?
When is the like fine line broken down between deterrence and containment?
I don't understand your question. I don't think that's relevant to the DA.
Okay.
It's not an assurance DA.
It's not an assurance DA, so it does not matter. Wait, how is it not an assurance DA?
Because it's about GCC cooperation.
With,
as long as
with
they
the
are,
U.S.?
Yeah, as long
That's
as the
about
U.S. and
assurance.
GCC are cooperating in the status quo, which we read evidence of
Then why does the
NBC
plan
Friends
hurt?
Pressy
Why does the
that
plan
they
hurt
are.
cooperation?
Why does the plan what?
Hurt cooperation.
Our Pollock and 15 evidence says that as long as the military is not involved, the GCC states will not cooperate with each other
It
because
says,
they
in the absence
need
of a strong American pushback of Iran, the GCC's default mode is to attack on their own. That is definitionally what the assurance DA is. But
that's
okay.
what the deterrence DA is. There's a distinction.
Wait. Okay, the Bucci card, is the impact here Saudi prolif? Because it says Saudi
No, it's
allied
just
with
Saudis
Pakistan.
already have like
Well,
the capacity for nuclear escalation.
What?
Yeah, the Saudis are allied with the Pakistans who have nuclear weapons. So as long as they're allied with Pakistan,
So
they
Pakistan
can
would start
escalate
nuking
nuclear
the Middle
weapons.
East because the U.S. withdraws its ground presence?
That's what our evidence says. It's pretty
Why?
good about that. It says a huge amount of firepower would be concentrated in a small region because of the
because
cooperation
Saudis
between
get
Saudi and Pakistan.
We'll take a little bit of breath. Finally pulling that out.
Okay.
It's an 8:05 left.
Mm-hmm. The order is going to be the Iran advantage, T, the counterplan, K, then the GCCDA.
I'm sorry. Iran, T, counterplan, K, D?
K, GCC. And there's an overview of the case below.
I'm sorry, for case, T, counterplan, critique, GCC,
Yeah.
and overview on the case.
On case, yeah. I'm going to be talking for a little bit before I get to get a little
I like
overheated
the
sometimes.
matching.
I try my very best. It usually doesn't work out. Alright, is everybody good?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Oh. Cool. I have rain boards coming in the status
Status quo versus regime survival. Iran perceive themselves as being backed into a corner. Fears of regime change will prompt retaliatory measures that draw on the whole Middle East. Second is regional lash out. U.S.-Iran tensions exacerbate hostility between Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. These conflicts will escalate from proxy warfare to an explosive point without U.S.-Iranian rapprochement. That's Musavian 3. Deterrence does not check spiral. Model of conflict is more applicable. Each side views the other as a revisionist challenger, interpreting the other's actions in the most aggressive light possible. Because each side believes compromise will only cause more aggression, the risk of escalation becomes likely. That's MaMc. War has placed nuclear use. They concede Israel was not to attacks with nuclear reprisals. They were outnumbered, rely upon nuclear force that are arrest evidence. So they have no answer to the fact that the Middle East war is coming in status quo, which means any impact to any disadvantages. Generally not unique. First argument, no centralization escalation doesn't apply. Your argument is out there. The Nagorno-Karabakh region, which is inherently different from the centralization region. The region is talking about there are historically animosity over ties in Armenian occupation of the Nagorno-Karabakh region, which uniquely likely to escalate. The blank evidence might be old, but in my DE post-state series, it's from 2015, indicates celebration of the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide is uniquely going to cause escalation, as well as recent forms of arms sales. Gas Russia will get drawn in Kusira. 11 the chance that Russia getting involved in the war have an increase of the U.S. might intervene in the terms of causes of the countries that comprise the CIS belong to Russia's vital interest. Should other countries that try to get a foothold, these might escalate into a nuclear exchange. Their evidence is about Ukraine. Only our evidence about the military commitment we have to Turkey and the status quo, which is why we would immediately get drawn in. Yes, Israel strike the evidence from the Jordan Times. This from 2013 has no qualifications. Our evidence says that they would respond to the fog of war with nuclear uses. That was a forensic sentence above. They say we don't solve. Batanka says that Batanka evidence says that a rapprochement with the United States causes Iran to move away from Russia's agenda, which means they would be able to be a much more successful mediator. Our evidence post-state theorists, they say no escalation of conflict. Are you already saying that above? They say status quo. It's all GCC Iran cooperation. This is only about Zarif, who's the foreign minister, and very optimistic. You have to get hardliners aboard and able to prevent war. That's the Musavian evidence. That's the Musavian evidence. Yes, conventional conflict is likely to escalate over S-300s. They make military presence useless and are able to shut down air corridors and cut off ocean routes, obviating any deterrent we have, which causes double Middle East war. That's our Stevens evidence. Hanote concludes that it crosses deterrence and that training can't solve. Hanote 15, the S-300 is capable of junior aircraft over large area to the USA. Bringing under action for granted the S-300 changes this over to come to the system with the credit deployment and represents proliferation of A280 systems. Are able to credit the S-300 force in the U.S. to watch for projecting power training to prepare against the S-300 is the type demon device to pressure cuts having the Air Force units are not trained. Or evidence does indicate that reverse calls to defense use says that the United States will be able to fill in the market share gap and provide the arms sales that they need to also withdraw the presence removes the impetus for Iran to get access to the weapons in the first place. That's one easy bar to evidence topicality. We also will remove the troops. Second is rotationally deployed forces and infrastructure. Crawford 3, the NMS provides overseas presence and strategic placement of fertilization drones and fertilization machinery deployed to military forces overseas the infrastructure and people position equipment necessary to sustain the strategic mobility requires robust transportation supported by adequate and sufficient refilling assets, mobility infrastructure, and machinery handling equipment and preposition sites of supplies and equipment presence is much more than troop levels. First of all, military presence is much more than simply question the troop levels of official destination side. The U.S. maintains its presence over debates and after you nor the military of the ultimate arbiters of our constituents who observes again and entry has on to the base as a place from which the military force supplies if it looks like a duck and a price like a duck. Pick out of shoots with decimated affirmative grounded lead to bad debates because every debate, every affirmative becomes extra topical because they also have to withdraw the guns that the troops actually use, and they would just be able to pick out of just withdraw the guns and leave the troops and get any base get any trip art just that good is good enough. We don't make debate impossible. Don't put us down competing against intimidation, incentivize going theory with crowds that substance. Now the cooperation counterplay. Permutation tells none of the F1 is regional influence. Iran views its regional goals being dependent on the lessening of U.S. military presence, while there are individual issues on which we can cooperate. The U.S. and Iran mutual distrust over each other's influence is the root of hostility that causes war. That's our particular evidence. It also causes diplomatic focus on military hostility, which means the counterplay can't spill over to particular 10. The conflict has been focused on dispute over the two sides of the U.S. can accept Iran's role, especially in the Gulf of Washington. Tehran can reach a practical approach which challenges caused by the U.S. presence and the proximity of Iran's borders. Iran has to both coalition and friendly states and major sources typically emanate from the Iran-U.S. hostile relations and executive impact on Iran's regional border, which has saturated Iran's political energy for the sake of tackling U.S. presence. Quote, the U.S. military presence in Iran's borders combined with the strategy of establishing military bases in the neighborhood is perceived by Iran as a national security threat. Second is threat perception. Since the threat perceptions, Iran views our presence as the greatest threat to regime survival. Only withdrawal can assure their border security. That's necessary for broader cooperation. That's Friedman and Musavian 3's allied antagonism. Current presence gives allies a license to antagonize Iran because they think we will inevitably back them up. Only withdrawal creates the rapprochement between Iran and the U.S. necessary to Iran and Saudi Arabia and Israeli escalating antagonism impact into the war. That's our Musavian and Perez evidence. Presence is key to reinforces commitment. It sustains GCC free riding octave 11 from Tehran's protective defense of the heat destabilizing infrastructure move with American influence and on subjected GCC states are vulnerable due to lack of military experience and modest population. And Zone has the strategic the GCC been conscious about confrontation to whether on commercial nature fetch to devote to be about confrontation despite the reasons to it for confrontation. They have not been able to reduce their trust to the U.S. due to the U.S. continuing around the use of actual tribal governments who rely on asset of GCC military dependence on the U.S. but these activates branding and the representation since the U.S. presence produces substantial branding and lies to prevent normalization of relation military presence not only promotes passivity but prevents the Gulf countries from redefining soft power tools permutation to the plan and any combination of compound planks. No cooperation. Senior officials back Khomeini who banned the counterplan good enough in 1021. The features one of several to warn young Iranians that American war to seek into the use of shield to infiltrate the country with cultural influence and destroy Islamic values. Another senior cleric into which Khomeini's no negotiations stance calling at the final world officials. Iran is busy cooperating with the U.S. against ISIS. Iranian official making clear that a nuclear agreement will not change Iran's policies. Plan gets commanding on board capitulation. KT trace 17. The deal is transactional, not transformational for committing the most of event with the U.S. requires that requires an American capitulation in the meeting opposition to the West and the regime's DNA. The media will tighten the screws to show who was boss and limit. The space open. Weary says the U.S. and the Congress is a non-starter. Wearing is a culty 1014. They transfer the vulnerability to leverage the value of the attachers ring. Creating an anti-wheeling system that collapse U.S. membership in the security fund for the Gulf to be an answer. With the Iranians' permutation to the counterplan, it doesn't facilitate withdrawal because the counterplan PLs are sustained military presence. Okay. Ruled about the side where the plan superior competitive policy option any other interpretation of assignments and the one is to focus on predictable requires to make permutation to the plan and engage in a feminist career color feminist career of color critique the affirmative step in the right direction which all eliminates our permanent militarism which is defining the reason that's our Mistavian evidence militant opposition and compromise with the settler state important for resistance Weaver and Zabin we have example examples of diplomacy where everybody flat the pressure the two are not mutually exclusive any estimate of all the commitment to native community this is not mean everybody must be a month or already grateful there or those willing to demand the research of the breadth and culture of that committed their good work allows me to emphasize the things the different culture to people that happen to both the war against the matter for the survival of the people, the players, and the struggles are indigenous peoples and the embedded social and political concerts of colonialism. And I guess are committed to Native community. If you want to be relevant to Native peoples, if you want to understand the world as it is, we must see what the issue reality is. Only then will be a standard chance of generating more light than he. The alternatives voting issue, interrogating IRs. It's pagan could morph into any policy action or ethical stance in the block into the affirmative left constructed to get off and reject the team issue has already happened. The alternative fuel system is too sticky to wish away Soren said. Not to eat the fact that narrative is constructed to make it less real. It is not acceptance of this sort of phenomenon which produces reification. Reification is reduced by the change of release and totally specific phenomenon to natural and disrespectful theory comes to contain advice of that does not mean that it is without mirror there were no two grounds then anything goes how again post positive practice be distinguished from the utopianism he was constrained to the world but they are constrained by structures critical theory can represent an alternative order but it's constrained by historical process most positivism epistemologically cut off from evaluating the relative mirror to different projects multiplication worlds are voting issue causes structure they'll just go for whatever we're going to cover making it possible for us to sicken off and taking uses against us second a shallow education they don't defend their absence disincentivizing the future with trades which makes rigorous policy examination possible encourages contradictions which is what they have done in this debate by reading a GCC lash out disadvantage and the necessity of containing Iran as well as a criticism calls into question U.S. security practices makes it possible for the 2AC to leverage unique impact turns against some contradiction. They have one conditional option or non-contradictory disposition rules. No judge kick after the rank has achieved the 2AR, which is the last affirmative speech. GCC disadvantage. The plan is able to solve its non-unique proxy conflicts growing on in the MaMc already in Iraq, withdrawal force the GCC to internalize the cost of maintaining stability, prompting them to regionalize alliances, etc. That's our Guzanti, Yemen, and Scoop decides empirical instances of Iran GCC cooperation with true. We are able to solve the Lincoln impact corridor all about the status quo, but military presence is not key because perception of abandonment exists now. Trump on 10-9. These diplomats are going to recall the moment when America accounted for so little, and the Mideast of U.S. retains 45,000 troops since the year, but it's since the year for strengthening America's ability to influence the reason of its appetite during confession that a risk of first watching and focus on a pivot to reach a just and want to reach such as well as sound military muscle. That's the main thing. It's the people's belief that we will use that muscle set a former U.S. ambassador reception sees beginning traction. Allies feel abandoned after the deal with the regional leaders compare support for Assad with Washington's willingness to let go of its allies. U.S. Iranian tensions exacerbate hostility between Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, etc., which means that escalation to war isn't escalation to war is going to happen now. The S-300 also makes military presence useless, which is uniquely a scenario for Gulf War and Gulf lash out in the status quo. That's where Stevens evidence reduce U.S. Saudi ties boost Saudi Israeli cooperation solves peace process. Klein 13. The desperation of the Saudis increase cooperation with Israel to unprecedented levels of attention to major cooperation. The event of attack on a race of facilities including Israeli unique actions Saudi united against the Iranians is right. The Saudis are too in the mirrors to acknowledge the relationship between Saudi Israeli relation pressure the Palestinians to become the American table with position to give us a play more against such a role in the program can officially court give us going to be instrumental in pursuing the basement of a possible leadership entertain and being on the right side. The Saudis seem to be using financial large assets to press the Hamas into larger term truths while they keep it in concept away from the Iranian assets. Something brings together all the posts like a common enemy nuclear war. No Washington the Palestinian Israeli conflict has become more dangerous than ever before. When makes the Palestinian Israeli conflict is so dangerous that half the world over threats of conflict is taking nuclear bomb. There is no conflict on earth that has the same as the one who has the Palestinian Israeli conflict. This conflict may be solved by time is running out. The world has produced a successful formula. This conflict may lead to an all-out nuclear war with millions would die. This is no longer an exaggeration. Marked out exaggeration. No impact to Saudi pro-live has found the Iranians had about 15 to be referred to but somebody doesn't have that ability. Saudi Arabia does not have any reactors. The first one go online until 2022 to ready last human message with operating nuclear infrastructure to sound like the Saudis will get a nuclear weapon from Pakistan. Marked out weapon from Pakistan.
Sorry, where did you mark the Klein evidence?
The Klein. I didn't mark the Klein card. I marked the Nawash card, and that was at exaggeration.
Sorry,
and then I marked the Esfandiari card at nuclear weapon, or just weapon. Or weapon from Pakistan, sorry.
Alright. I want to start on this first piece of evidence you read, the Coursera evidence. It's from 2011, and it says that other countries are going to get a foothold in Russia's zone. Why haven't they done this in 4 years?
No. So the context of this card was an attempt to set up negotiations and mediators over the Nagorno-Karabakh crisis, and those were kind of actualized in 2013, but those talks inevitably fell through. Our argument is much more that if that conflict is likely to escalate, the United States would side with Turkey, who is
Okay, it says should other countries decide to try and get a foothold, why haven't they tried to get a foothold?
Well, our argument is that those negotiations failed.
Okay.
The NYT and Batanka evidence says that attempt did not work. Batanka's from 2014 and assumes those talks. This is just like a escalation claim based on alliance commitments.
Let's go to the terse evidence on T. So this person is just like an investigative journalist and a historian. What data or analysis are they using to define U.S. military presence?
Well, our definition for military presence that we're going to defend is our Crawford card, but terse is, extremely qualified, also a fellow at Harvard University's Radcliffe Institute. If you want to have like a qualifications debate about T, the piece of evidence is from 06.
I was merely asking what he's using to define U.S. military presence.
Oh, that is a counter to your definition of presence as base or presence as
I understand what the definition is.
It's an education claim. It's an impact argument. It says that if you solely define presence as troops, you miss a good, rich debate about U.S. foreign policy. It's just an impact claim.
I'm going to Counterplan. Your Barziger evidence. How does withdrawing forces result in the U.S. accepting Iran's role?
So it sends the perception that we're willing to allow them to have their own regional sphere of influence. Our Friedman evidence says that in the status quo, because we have presence on their western border, that's the most likely place that we would engage in things such as regime change actions by securing that western.
We have presence in other places. It's not just the western border.
Well,
so I'm wondering...
you did not make that argument. There's a great piece of evidence that we have in the... Well, I know, but the eastern border argument, the presence deployed there was to fight the Taliban. We cooperated with Iran to fight the Taliban in 01 to 03, which is why they don't perceive that presence as being threatening. But the western border is key. That's also our internal link into GCC lashout.
Okay, I'm wondering what piece of evidence you have that is reverse causal that says that withdrawing U.S. forces results in Iran actually being like, we have a role in the Middle East.
The 1AC Friedman card.
Okay.
And then the 1AC Barzigar card.
That's fine.
And like the Nusabian cards kind of set that up contextually, but those are much more impact cards.
Okay, I want to go to the K. You read this piece of Weaver evidence, like step in the right direction. How does the plan demand redress for genocide?
Well, one, the permutation would do that. This card is just an impact turn to your pure anti-status or anti-law forms of politics. Like, we think the alternative was extremely... We think the alternative was just, like, extraordinarily vague in terms of what it feared.
I don't agree, but that's fine. I'm asking how a permutation will result in redress.
The affirmative is not mutually exclusive with advocacy for redress against native genocide. Okay. What do you mean it doesn't result in redress? Does the alternative result in redress? Does the alternative advocate for redress? If it does, then yes, the permutation would solve that. If it doesn't, then you don't solve that impact either.
But I can just like save a short and literature base associated with the military presence makes precision a critical standard for interpreting what action should not be allowed. Reasonability creates a race to be germane and makes negative race to research run impossible because all the phrases in the topic have so many different meanings. You need to hold the line now. Extend our interpretation for an act to be topical. They to significantly reduce U.S. military personnel or troops in one of the topic regions. Our interpretation is citing a definition of military presence from the U.S. Department of Defense and is contextual to how the contextual to how the military is implemented. Context is critical because our interpretation uses military definitions which are necessary on the military presence topic. The Oxford Essential Dictionary of the U.S. military into the U.S. military dictionary present a group of people, especially soldiers. Additionally, the act does not meet our interpretation. They create a brigade minus posture that limits carriers in the region and specifies it through force posture changes, which at best sets a cap on forces, but does not lead to an actual reduction of physical troops or personnel in the region, which is magnified by the fact that you have conceded our interpretation of what these posture changes would look like. Now you link to a massive disaster because not being in the specific reduction in troops or personnel forces an impossible research standard where negatives have to research every single country and every single topic area and every type of military presence from any branch of the military, both onshore and offshore. Holding the line on troops makes equitable, predictable ground, especially because each individual military base or facility has its own literature base, and because there's such a diversity of military facilities, their interpretation explodes. The top two includes any type of military unit, allowing the small unpredictable box, making negative research impossible. Uniquely true in the world of the posture-based arguments because the plan, because our one is the Kreppenoff evidence that was conceded indicates the posture is a set of interconnected components, including things like forward-based forces and bases, facilities, global attack forces based on U.S. territory, mobility, logistics, infrastructure, forcible entry, rapid-based construction forces, and a global C-31 attack, all of which require independent legal arrangements like treaties and SOFAs, which is what I was getting at in the cross-examination of the 1AC, because these different types of mechanisms and process allow you to always radically reconfigure the way that our research base operates, which makes it impossible to be negative on their interpretation. Would also allow for all sorts of consolidation apps. An example would be what would be topical under their interpretation would be to move all military infrastructure to the farthest output of Japan, where China can't reach it, including boots and personnel. And the interpretation is key to visibility, physical removal, and drawdown. Now the topical version would solve all of your offense because it would just have the U.S. significantly reduce military presence in the region by reducing U.S. military troops, and could still advocate carriers because our interpretation is a floor, not a ceiling, which is sufficient to answer your first two your first two arguments. You have to include troops and a reduction of those troops within the mandate of the plan. Your arguments about PICs don't make any sense because you just make theoretical objections against PICs that cheap, but we should get access to we should still get access to them in order to be able to debate against you. Now, the counterplan proper. The counterplan solves the entirety of the affirmative. The security dilemma. The goal is what stems from mistrust and misperceptions of intent. That's our way. And the Solosky evidence of counterplan would resolve the problems by creating a framework to ensure the balance of power between insider and outsider interests. The eighth point is this solved because it creates rules and norms for behavior. The regional dialogue mandated by the counterplan allows for actors to determine what behaviors and actions are acceptable in the region, which resolves the internals of your first evidence or your first card, which is talking about how the Middle East is in dire need of cooperation and needing to work collaboratively. This point is it allows Iran to expand without threatening the Gulf states. The counterplan is Goldilocks because it ensures allied commitments are maintained, but also signals to Iran that we are not trying to contain them. BC point is it bolsters relations by creating a new form to resolve conflicts. Now, two, it also solves the long-term withdrawal and reduced presence because ASA point it moves the Gulf states away from the reliance on U.S. military by creating new opportunities to take responsibility for their security. BSA point is international multilateralism encourages foreign powers to take responsibility for security in the region. Now, three, there is only a risk that fast withdrawal would freak out states and trigger our GCC to set because the counterplan is the only thing that creates a framework to slowly change the status quo presence unless they have a reason that fast withdrawal is necessary. Then you should default to the counterplan. Obviously, we would resolve any questions of fast withdrawal. Do things like the cooperation that would be facilitated in the Middle East. Now, we saw the first scenario with Iran-U.S. cooperation writ large by bringing Iran into the dialogue. The declaratory policy plank would resolve fears that Khamenei is intent. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. Is intent on toppling the Islamic Republic outlined in your Saberi evidence. Also, gives Iran the opportunity to be a regional hegemon and have types of economic security ties, which is what they want. It also solves your scenario 2 because it solves the reason for the sale of S-300s in the first place because they won't need to challenge the U.S. militarily. Your 1AC evidence also says that the countries both believe that the U.S. needs to be clearly limited, which is clearly a step that the counterplan would take, but not the plan. Also solves your scenario 3 because your evidence says that Iran needs relations with the U.S. to feel less concerned about the possibility of instability, which is obviously obviously what we were resolving. Now, there's a low threshold for solvency because you have only offered a litany of normative descriptions about the status quo, and you want to say, and it made logical, you've made leaps in logic that because the status quo is no longer, that suddenly everyone will get along and stop sharing their S-300s and cooperate, but only the counterplan is what mandates that type of facilitated cooperation. Now, star this card, it says that the combination of the counterplan is comparative to the absolvency mechanism is the best approach to goals, peace, and stability. Wehary and Solosky, 10-14. The main message is that Washington needs to communicate the binding the to the system of rules and institutes to be one of the limited remaining part of the make it less of therefore the opportunity to reduce tensions. It's Christ and affirmed that to be studied escalating to the armed conflict with the military and the relationships between the United States has devoted the GCC to would remain the bedrock of the goals of security, the regional security, the foreign, would not substitute for these commitments the United States should take. It's bad for diplomatic opportunity to begin the discussion of the goals of a new regional security for these dialogues. Death could yield concrete to the force of cooperation and greater trust. The agenda could be brought into the discuss the confidence and security building measures. The U.S. government strategy that hinges entirely on rollback to the detriment of reducing tension to pursuing mutual cooperation, where U.S. and Iranian interests overlap will increase rather than reduce contradiction in the strategy that incorporates the parallel project construction. The more inclusive dialogue of the goals would be far more effective in advancing U.S. interests and certain long-term success will hinge upon the formulating a set of near-term process and outcomes designed to build a confidence in the ambitious security ranges, permutations. I'm going to do them all together, so don't forget to answer one. The permutation do both links to the GCC did because it freaks our allies and bolting around and causes debate in progress. Obviously, the second link would also, or the second permutation to do any combination of these planks would still link to the distance because you lead to fast control, which is not the mandate of the counterplan. Now, permutation to the counterplan is severance out of reduction is the voting issue for fairness and education to destroy the possibility of stable competition because they can always sever out of discount links or counterplan. Counterplan distinguishes your first solvency evidence is your Burgos evidence. It says that the problem is either Iran is pissed off because of close proximity of U.S. presence, or and this is the ununderlined portion that the region, because of the region's geopolitical changes, means we don't have to solve the presence component, just the geopolitical changes that would occur as a result of counterplan. Now, your first perceptions argument was answered in the overview of Iran having clarification. Our strategy means Iran no longer views our presence as being threatening. You are not sufficient to solve your third solvency deficit of allied antagonism because, yeah, the GCC will stop needling Iran, but you would cause a major lash out, which will be explained on the disc. Your good enough card is just talking about space over negotiations. The answer not forms mandated by the counterplan. Your next two cards say literally nothing because there's just rhetoric from leaders. There's no legal ban that occurs. Additionally, all of our solvency evidence is far more comparative. Additionally, everyone will say yes. Washington 15. If the study believes that stability can be achieved without a run plan in equal order, they are deemed the terms right for the study to reciprocate and raising a debate over sure could help to assert toward a high level of diplomacy and service the force of the stability by breaking the hostility and misperceptions, marks, and misperception. Now, the case debate, there's no chance of escalation or white evidence is better than yours. This does that a variety of influential actors in the region who now share their interest in who share mutual interest in reducing things like terrorism and drug trafficking and gives the incentive for cooperative diplomacy, which is the reason nobody would ever go to war, especially because your evidence cites that they want to reduce animosity between one another. Our alarming evidence is that Putin is now anti-logical Germany and has acted as a moderate. He's acted moderately on Ukraine and the relations between them and the U.S. because he's aware of Russian limitations, which is the reason there would never be a war between the U.S. and Russia. Also, there's no chance of Israel striking the status quo because there are new governmental coalitions that are pressuring Israelis to stay out of conflict because the war is terrifying to them. Experts believe that no Israeli attack would even be sufficient to deter an ambitious Iranian nuclear program, which makes your impacts inevitable. Just I want to see a low screen evidence. Additionally, you are insufficient to solve the S-300s that you can vote. They get it on presumption because they have no reverse causal evidence that says that Iran's conventional military or how it gets depleted because of decades of sanctions and their terrible military, which means that you have no reason that they would stop getting sales from Russia, and these sales are already locked in. That was our team evidence. Besides, the defense minister that agreements have already been made at the end of August, which means you don't do jack shit, and the S-300 sale is Neville Mayor News 823. Iran's defense minister said a new contract has been set for the Russian and the previous contract will be completed by the end of 2020 for disciplining the run with the S-300 just after the recent negotiations. Market negotiations.
We'll take some prep, 805.
No. Well, yeah, I just want you to read one card.
I don't think we need that for okay, it's fine. Just goes to show off. Yeah. All right. 741. So let's talk about the counterplan and whether or not Iran would say yes. So on October 7th, Khomeini banned legally continual negotiations with the United States over literally anything.
I disagree with that. It said banned. That was rhetoric. That was implemented.
How do you know that was rhetoric? Khomeini is the supreme legal authority as endowed by the Iranian constitution.
Your it's a quotation. It is not a legal bans.
Okay, so if we read another
and
card
also
that
your
says
evidence
it was
is
in
not,
fact a legal
your
ban,
evidence is
does
also
that
not,
meet your
your
threshold?
evidence is also not talking about a ban on cooperative
No, it is. So the reason why Khomeini made this ban was that he said that negotiations with the United States are just a soft form of regime change because it's the U.S. trying to increase its cultural influence and decrease Islamic religious values. Why exactly would they accept the counterplan? Even if it's not legal, that's still the perception.
No,
why would they accept the counterplan?
What you have just described to me is obviously something that is distinct from the counterplan. They are referencing U.S. rhetoric.
No, Khomeini is saying that all cooperation with the United States,
that's not
even
what
soft
saying,
cooperation.
And that's not what your evidence says.
Okay, well, you don't have any card post that speech, so that's really problematic.
I read the last piece of evidence I read on the counterplan definitely indicates they would have the incentive to cooperate.
No, your Marashi card is from June. It's not from the October 7th speech. Okay, let's talk about topicality. So you yourself had said that troops should be interpreted as a floor, not a ceiling. The affirmative in 1AC Crossix clarified that the brigade minus force posture is literally just a reduction from the 35 to 45,000 troops we have in the status quo to 5,000 to 10,000 troops. We said in 1AC Crossix that it withdraws troops. Why do we not meet this interpretation?
Okay, we don't think your reclarification is true. We've said that semantically, the force brigade minus posture is what means you do not lead to a reduction in troops.
Hold on, what card do you think says that? That is literally just an assertion. Our Robner evidence says that a brigade minus force posture is a reduction of about 30,000 troops. Why exactly is that not sufficient to meet your violation?
No, that's not what a force brigade minus posture is. Factually, it just says a cap.
Do you have a
that
single
resolves
card that
none
says
of my redeployment arguments.
Hold on, do you have a card that says that?
The posture question? Yeah, it was the one that you can see from 1AC. I spent a lot of time talking about it.
What posture card do you have?
This like Kremke evidence or whatever.
It's not about brigade.
Where does it say that changing from a certain posture to a different posture does not involve the reduction of troops?
It talks about using posture can be envisioned as an interconnected set of components, including things like
forces.
Yes, overseas bases, facilities, global attack forces based on U.S. territory, in space, mobility, and logistics infrastructure. Tons of other things that all occur.
Your only impact claim based on that
definition. The bottom of the card says that supporting that has to be implemented through legal arrangements and treaties such as SOFAs.
No, seriously,
it's a great card.
Please. Your only impact based upon this piece of evidence is that we talk about things other than troops. But you yourself clarified that troops are a floor, not a ceiling for what the affirmative can withdraw.
No, you're missing the procedural components of the argument.
But you can change the SOFA and get SOFA-based advantages by just withdrawing troops as well. Why does that not link to your offense?
Our argument is that the process of the plan does not lead to reduction in troops. It leads to things like treaties and arrangements on SOFAs. No, I like how it impacts. She's gonna read this Belardeti.
Just 1 second preferably.
Yes.
All right.
9 seconds.
What are you all at now?
Well, we ended with 8:01 left, so now it's 7:52. Wait, no, we ended with 7:41, so now it's 7:32. Sorry, I lied to you.
All right, so advantage, criticism, DA. You can't move a stand.
Oh, damn.
Wait, Mary, did you say she was finishing anything off your
No,
computer?
she's gonna read this Belardeti evidence. Belardeti.
Thank you. Cool.
And that'll be it.
Do you want to work on anything?
No.
Yeah.
I would like that.
All right, cool. Thank you.
I'm sorry, what's the order one more time? Case.
Advantage, criticism, DA. Are we good? No Nagara impact, no side will escalate brutality, and 12 the motion resolution is not the interest of either Armenians or where they would need Russia to help the price to pay for a conflict would be lots of independence over both. Our Azerbaijan does not want to have Russia closer and will never action without green light for Turkey cause of war will not be a positive factor. Criticism. Except the permutation is a test of competition, no office because their answers were vaguely about should have asked more about in cross-sex. The alternative was never interrogating our means there's no abuse here, 0 times true. If we look at conditionality is good, that's not a reason to reject the team. Conditionality is good versus advocacy. So the advocate will have to speak to many different audiences who will be persuaded by different things. This means there's no impact or contra because it forces the perpetrator to respond to many attacks and advocate against many lines of thinking, increase their advocacy education, even the strategic aspects of debate, teach them to see cross applications, and we should get to test the alpha mold on different levels. No strategies to neglect ways of learning to prep. The app has infinite prep time and personalized speech. The topic has multiple mechanisms. Planks it's impossible to be negative. They aren't giving us many chances to beat the affirmative and 2 in our checks and even the block checks. We are only voting for one conditional position. We have one position which is not contradictory. Reject the argument, not the team DA. Cool. The impact of nuclear war that spills over, that's our Bush evidence biggest internal link to Middle Eastern war because withdrawal from the region is what escalates conflict. Miscalc is guaranteed because of proximity of countries and sites of military arsenals possessed by the combatants. A bigger internal link magnitude in the affirmative Russell in 09. Stability in the region is undermined as asymmetric nations not seen actually perception of Israel in the United States. The prospect that Iran's leader just activated multiple prophylactic communication for escalation. What happened is a real miscalculation of these factors of conflict. But escalate quickly escalate regional attackers with chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, for such a worldwide events would be likely to develop momentum which is for the entire world and military relations key to Gulf state relations, which means we solve ISIS, Syria war and Saudi-Iran conflict, Gaza, and 15. United States and the Gulf the United States and the Gulf monarchies have a sustainable mutually beneficial relationship bound together by their mutual dependence on their security test with the United States. The relationship of American leaders to considerable numbers to bring its Gulf allies together as a common stance toward this year and this good encourage a diplomatic solution to the war that regional efforts against the Islamic State. Says the British Secretary of Intentions positioning the politics of Middle Eastern states encourage the Saudi Iran and approaches. A lot of their answers on the counterplan or on the DA don't make sense in the context of the counterplan because the plan doesn't solve their Musani evidence and assume the cooperation mechanism which resolves their two zones warring from their evidence, and they say no uniqueness, but the Camp David meeting bolstered boosted U.S. GCC ties another evidence accounts for this. It signaled the strategy of military cooperation between the nation and demonstrated that the U.S. resolved to counter Iran and will abandon GCC state. That's our FPV evidence, and we have the best evidence. Relations will be fine going forward. That resolves Iran and Middle Eastern conflict. On the plan causes relations to tank and our legal impacts are unique. Can I have your timer? Goldberg and Dalton 15. Washington inclination will be signal its commitment by military touch will be necessary, but not sufficient closing up that has opened up between the United States and GCC and the GCC going forward. The regional strategy is not overlap to achieve their partisan. Both sides will be flexible, coordinated approach can lead to a more stable Middle East in which Iranian influence will be held in check by the United States and GCC partners diverge further, and the result will be in an even messier region where Iran's positions will be strengthened. The Gusaki evidence assumes no external security guarantee, but the counterplan resolves that by creating a security forum that's obviously within the 2NC, and I'll go to the link level here. Yes, military presence is uniquely stabilizing. Lots of U.S. presence causes the Gulf allies to lash out from fear of exposure. They will take exponential and exceptional and escalating actions to deter Iran all the way to engaging war. That's our full evidence. You should pull it to the Trofimo evidence because this is just a columnist, while Pollock is a former CIA analysis on the Middle East, and the GCC will view the plan as a betrayal, withdrawal causes fear that makes them engage in military force. Goldberg and Dalton 15. Hovering over the U.S. GCC relations to why the held fear that Washington is withdrawing from the region as part of a return to lead the GCC states defender for themselves. The Gulf states that have relied on the U.S. to deter or deal with any threat to the regional order. The GCC individually uses its fundamental to change the relationship back into a betrayal. New uncertainty in the Middle East and how they influence the Gulf states and strategic conflicts increase their willingness to use force. Also, the plan causes the GCC to use military strength to deter Iran. The impact is for the ratchets up for provoking aggression on both sides. Our evidence is reverse causal. Then the loss of presence causes war, but remaining in the Gulf solves it because it assures allies and deters Iran. Polling 15. There is a dangerous audience around. Allies may fear that the U.S. intends to get out of the Middle East. Treating the Gulf states are far more likely to get Iran's base to try to deter Iranians. The Gulf states are not strong enough to take on Iran. They could easily provoke aggression or overstretch their capabilities and desire conflict. The possibility the U.S. is not there to reach their Gulf states and deter Iran. These things could get ugly. Iranian strategy is an area of American power. The Iranians are willing to challenge U.S. power military even by proxy. Next, the Nexus evidence also cites beliefs. If that is true, then perception of the evidence that I just read is able to resolve this, and the counterplan resolves Iran tensions better. That was in the 2AC. Their Saudi-Israel cooperation scenario doesn't make any sense because the fear of abandonment outweighs any of their returns, because bolstering relations absent the U.S. has to be built in a slow move to cooperation. The plan doesn't resolve any concerns. Goldberg and 15. The benefits of increased cooperation can be stimulated by seizing those opportunities to compete anxiety in Gulf of the United States. Adversaries are Iranian hegemony planning a rear teacher Washington lines through any cooperation will have to be accompanied by continuous, consolidates no basic need to defend, so carried cooperation with traditional allies to reassure the defensive goals will mean maintaining the U.S. process initiative toward reducing U.S. presence goals in the immediate aftermath of a deal could feed a perception of regional abandonment, leading to allies to take self-help actions that could worsen regional tensions. The United States should pursue a patent limited and incremental approach there. Saudi Israel evidence is also just rhetoric. Our evidence is actually citing what would happen if the U.S. Military loses its grip on the Iran cooperation, and this scenario also the plan forces the GCC to attack on their own. Saudi's role of defense doesn't make sense.
We had 732.
Default to reasonability. This is offense. It's unreasonable for you to reject an act based on arbitrary interpretation of the plain text. It's especially true when the affirmative defense or removal of troops. We've defended that since the what is cost like the alternative. It's a race to the bottom to find the most limiting interpretation to exclude the affirmative debate as an arms race. Affidavation matters. There's no topical version. Our app is the topical version. It's a term of art used. Precision is dependent on the way the topic should be, which means the vision of the topic matters. Counter interpretation. Presence is the combination of troops and infrastructure. You should err affirmative. Any other interpretation means that we would just have to leave the basis, which makes debate incoherent. We can agree that we reduce military troops. You should look at the what is Wagner evidence. It says that reducing ground forces in the brigade minus plot posture includes the amounting of a few thousand ground troops, but more forces could hover in low thousands, but it would be well before the 50,000 that there is today, which means that we meet a majority of their interpretation. Their interpretation over limits. There's no topical app because they would just get the basis alternative cause or move the troops elsewhere. Counterplan troops should be a floor, not a ceiling, which is their argument. They rank all AFGAN. They could go for remove the base and say that at least the removal of troops and removal of troops would lead to a change in posture, which means that triggers their link arguments as well. Their impact arguments are incoherent. Our interpretation doesn't explode limits. Our interpretation means that the affirmative must remove troops. We agree with that. Would mean that we act as a term majority of the terminal impact. Any extra T argument is not a voting issue because they can still get counterpoints out of the extra T portion of the affirmative. Now, the case, yes, Israel strike. This is unique, and from their GCC last arguments, our evidence assumes the deal only the fog of war that exists in the status quo makes Israel impossible for them to distinguish between friend and foe, which causes them to use their nuclear arsenal. Iran war is inevitable. Containment causes sectarian violence, which is larger surprise than the cause of tensions. Iran perceives themselves as being backed into a corner. That means that they'll use asymmetric tactic, which is the only scenario for escalation, which turns their card on the disadvantage. The deal fails. The status quo, which means only we access uniqueness. Canadians backlash because of geographic and direct tactics means that the status quo is used as a spiral model of conflict. So only the affirmative can resolve it, not the counterplan. The S-300's impact. Yes, we solve it. Iranian fear of U.S. presence will strengthen their cooperation with Russia, which causes S-300 still Sparsgor is reverse causal, and so is their defense use evidence. Russia and Iran are not really good friends in the status quo, but Iran wants to be a Western partner, and so it relies on the Russia and then the intermediary term that causes Gulf missile wars, which escalate all conflicts and makes our presence worthless because it also causes GCC to lash out independently, not going to go for them to go to Karabakh impact. The counterplan. Permutation to the plan and the place of the counterplan that are not mutually exclusive with the affirmative. We can increase coordination with the GCC to be the the skeletal basing infrastructure that we have left, which solves the perception of abandonment, as well as creating a regional security dialogue in the counterplan. There is no cooperation. That's 2AC number 2. Moran says no to the counterplan solvency threshold should cut the other way. They don't trust norms because the spiral model of conflict that is in the status quo means that withdrawal is a prerequisite to any effective diplomacy. It heightens the risk of miscalculation because we interpret each other's actions in the most aggressive light possible. The counterplan's mandate versus cooperation is terrible because it's the same carrot and stick model versus regional influence. The status quo is Iran acting as a regional balancer to the U.S., which is causes a diplomatic focus trade-off. They're too bogged down and focused on containing U.S. threats to engage and follow on with other things. That's our bars of our evidence. Second is threat perception because of historical animosity. The RGC is thrown towards the U.S. president, which means it's always perceived as pressure against a revolutionary guard and the spread of regime change, which turns the affirmative. We read the conclusion of Weary and Sokolsky, which says that the strategy of rollback based on U.S. presence and assuring allies means that they will inevitably fail, and the strategy of including the U.S. means that it's perceived as that people will always backlash against the U.S. incorporation into the cooperative system itself. Third, 2AC number 3 is allied backlash. The GCC says no. This starts universal evidence on the DA. They hate the U.S. which collapses cooperation versus allied backlash. The link this is a link to our Israel impact, which means it's independently external. The troops sentiment to divide. They fracture already relationship because the U.S. is perceived as supporting the GCC in defense of Iran, which means that it creates a favorability posture, which does not allow the U.S. to create a forced shock doctrine, which turns the majority of their impact. 2AC number 5, the Khomeini argument. They blocked out negotiation with the U.S. absent a massive U.S. capitulation. Fear of land forces is necessary. It's a unique link term because they view cooperation as soft tactic abstinent, and this is legal authority plus. In 10-9 Khomeini that Iran would not negotiate with the U.S. None of the U.S. remain keeping specifically the U.S. Khomeini has a ultimate legal authority. His announcement effectively thwarts Rouhani's ambitions. Now the dissent. Weak impact toward cooperation between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. This is our add-on. The lack of a super good relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia is necessary to get them to converse with Israel and get Palestine on the table to bargain over the peace process. This turns the disadvantage because it means that any cooperation will only be possible as a result of Saudi-Israel rapprochement, which comes at a cost of U.S.-Saudi rapprochement. The fear of abandonment is our link argument, which means that only we control the terminal impact of the escalation of the disadvantage. Absent the U.S., they'll turn to Israel, which spills over to solve the peace process that causes nuclear war. They've dropped this impact, which they can the counterplan solves it because the net benefit is GCC abandonment, which means only we resolve the terminal impact argument. The Russell argument is just an impact to nuclear war, to Middle East war, which we access. Their gas argument is an impact to cooperation, which is linked toward by a majority of our arguments. The assurance now debate, which is 2AC number 1, the perception of withdrawal exists in the status quo because the pivot looks like in our evidence is from October 9th. You should prefer it because it speaks to motivations. The fear of withdrawal is already happening. Second is the deal, which already looks like a get on jail free card, which independently takes out the terminal impact because it means that international actors have incentive to prevent a lash out against Iran, but instead of provoking conflict, Saudis didn't show up to Camp David, which doesn't check. That's Lucy in 9-3. Solomon will use his business to push Obama to do more. Be talking. He'll be asking for missile defense helicopters and warship. The monarch stuff and doing back to Camp David because 2 hours to spur negotiation with Iran. The posture also invites hostile attitude in the city. In 14, the U.S. policies encourage Saudi Arabia to launch a hidden war that resulted in a hostile posture for Saudi Arabia towards Iran. The Iran and U.S. cooperation created an environment in which the GCC countries would be encouraged to move towards reconciliation with Iran. The U.S. cooperation would result in significant reduction in other tensions. The plan acts as a net link term to the way the GCC and regionalizes security. The rapprochement would turn into proxification of conflicts as GCC, Iran, and Israel cooperate over shared responsibilities. There's no lash out. The plan leaves some troops in the region, which takes out uniqueness for their internal link. Our finish. The Gupta card here. Gupta in 14, while Saudi Arabia referred to external balance and increasing by speculation under Western disengagement has presented Saudi Arabia with two choices: either intensifies computational stance against following the combination is a partnership in Washington posture and smaller GCC states and reception of Iran's efforts to like leadership. Riyadh's posture main driver of the special relationship is the shape of the power balance in the current architecture necessitates to move towards resolution. The critique conditionality may be good, but conduct with contradictions incentivizes no risk option for the affirmative. The deterrent CA and the critique of the U.S. broader colonialism and containment policies prevents offense. Conditionality itself solves the majority of their arguments, but contradictions make being impossible to generate counter-interpretations or arbitrary dispo without contradictions. The results majority of their offense and outweighs topicality limits or a sliding scale, but condo prevents debate over tea. In the first place, there's no alternative remedy. You should make tea a non-starter.
5:30.
the DA, the counterplan.
KDA counterplan, as I said.
That is what it is.
The K, the disad, the counter plan.
Any new stuff?
And I what?
Any new stuff?
Oh, yeah, good call. I did have a couple. I think it's in my 2NC document, in all fairness.
I can just.
If it's just like 1 or 2 cards, you can
It's, well, yeah, it's just
let me
one
know.
card. I'll just, like, send it out just to make sure.
Sure.
I'm sorry,
No worries. No.
You're good.
I didn't send underlining.
It didn't send underlining. It's kind of short, though. That bother me.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll get it. Don't worry. If it's in the doc, then we can find it.
Okay,
Yeah,
it should be. I think it is.
It's also not highlighted, so.
Yeah, it's not highlighted, so.
I got you.
I mean,
Don't worry.
I'm reading most of the words, but we can have a discussion over the
No
words
worries.
that were read if you're.
I found it. I'll put it into a doc.
I got it too. You're good.
Thank you. Okay, ready? The criticism you've conceded that advocacy skills are often for why contradictions are good and necessary because advocates inevitably speak to many different audiences who are inevitably persuaded by different things and without the ability to master these different types of arguments, you never capture that unique type of education that you never get in places outside of the debate community because this is the only community that allows for those types of time-pressed situations to also work heated critical thinking for the affirmative because it forces the abs to respond to many different lines of attack to see the ways in which contradictions operate in order to concede things strategically to make better arguments and to make you better debate or work heated condition. If we win that conditionally writ large is a good thing, it's a reason that you would reject question and contradiction because obviously it doesn't skew your ability to debate. If it's negative flexibility always because that has infinite prep time, personalized speech and topic and multiple mechanisms in place. You weren't topical in the first place, even though I'm not going for and the turn our tricks because we're only going for one position, reject the argument out of the team, and even if this were a thing, it would only be a reason to reject the conditional positions, not a reason to reject the offensive positions, things like the dissad. So yeah, even if I lose, I still got the dissad. Go to the dissad proper. You have conceded a litany of reasons for why the counterplan would be sufficient to resolve the majority of the internals that they're wanting to see. Authors are indicted, which means that if we win a 1% risk of the dissad is sufficient reason to turn, it would be a sufficient reason to turn negative because we are the only ones reading external scenarios that have a fast time frame that are likely to happen. If the dissad outweighs in Kurt's case, our GCC lash out evidence indicates that Iran, her GCC lash out against Iran would create the perfect storm for Middle Eastern war and miscalculation. Saudi alliance with Pakistan gives them access to things like nuclear weapons. The close proximity of all the countries within the region magnifies the danger of miscalculation and involvement after the fact, which is what the plan would result in triggers more accidental war. It makes our impact comparatively bigger and is a far bigger internal link to the Middle Eastern conflict because the GCC is the only thing that is the only entity that is holding the Persian Gulf together now, which means, or because it is the crux of how actors are able to relate to one another, which means there's only a risk that we would be sufficient to resolve all of the tensions that you want to see evidence is isolated. Now we are the most probable impact. Our Sunni Shia tension, our evidence indicates that Sunni Shia tension makes conditions ripe for war. There have been recent spikes in sectarian violence, increased numbers of extremists in the regions, and the Syrian war served as a recruiting ground for terrorists. In Saudi Arabia and Iran have devoted resources to potential proxy battles and escalation. Obviously, this would turn the advantage that you are going. This would turn the arguments you're going for in the case debating because obviously the sectarian violence is already there. Only lash out allows them the incentive to capitalize on those things. Also happens faster than the case debating because the GCC is so reliant on the U.S. acting as a proxy against Iran. Now the withdrawal creates a snowball effect of fearsome responses. Your own evidence makes these claims all over the place. If you don't believe me, read them. To his Turns case because the GCC alliance is critical to facilitate a coalition of responses against threats that are erupting in the Middle East. It sends a signal that we have a unified stance against sectarian violence and maintaining presence in the region is what gives us access to things like Saudi Arabia's airspace, which is able to facilitate attacks against different groups that prop up. But we also internal link turn Israel, American drawdown internal link to Israel because our wrestle evidence indicates sides the perceptions of them in the region that a preemptive attack and miscalculation is only likely to result in fear of abandonment by the United States and the status quo, the uniqueness debate, the camp, the meaning boosted U.S. GCC ties. And if Saudi Arabia didn't show up, it still signaled a strategy of military cooperation between all the GCC nations and demonstrated the U.S.'s resolve to counter Iran. It will not abandon GCC. That's the AFP evidence. Additionally, the one AR conceded the Goldenberg and Dalton evidence from late last month that says the restrictions will be fine going forward because of increased military aid, but only the plan causes relations to tank because it maintains U.S. flexibility in the region. Only the counterplan's coordinated approach and more stability of the region by creating the person called fear and lash out. That's our public evidence. The loss of U.S. support makes the GCC feel abandoned. They will lash out against Iran in order to keep Iranian influence in check, but withdrawals. The end result will be an even messier region where the Iran's position will be strengthened, which turns all of your scenarios now the link debate. The plan creates multiple vulnerabilities that cause escalation war in the person called fear and lash out. That's our public evidence. The loss of U.S. support makes the GCC feel abandoned. They will lash out against Iran in order to prevent their position from being compromised. The one era concedes our allied betrayal link. That's our one in our Goldenberg evidence. The GCC views leaving them as betrayed, causing them to use force of you because they view it as us going back on our word in the previous minutes. There are three framing issues. ASA claims our evidence is reverse causals, where their Trofimov evidence is only posturing about military muscle broadly. That's our public evidence. You should prefer it because our evidence is more qualified and speaks to the Iran and the Gulf. Neither will initiate conflict if the U.S. remains in the region, but will attack out of fear of their desire. Or if and B subpoenas fear undergirds all the GCC issues. That's our public evidence, which means you with your naked bundle link first leak turn debates because the plan will cause allies to overreact to protect themselves from the perceived threats. And C subpoenas are evidence says the link will cause exceptional attacks that will break from history, make their impact even don't apply because the plan changes now. Action of the Counterplan. We don't have to spend a lot of time here because you can drop a litany of reasons why we are sufficient to solve each of your advantages. Obviously, the permutation will still with any component of the permutation that includes true presence in the region would be severance because you leave chiefs there. We solve the Iranian cooperation writ large because we bring them into the dialogue. The different planes of the Counterplan create a combination where Iran has the capacity to have the opportunity for regional hedge, which is what it wants, but it also needs to feel like it knows a clear commitment of the U.S. actions, which was all the truancy analysis I did on extrapolating the warrants from your scenario, which means you should look back to my truancy if you're unsure of the solvency. We are sufficient to resolve the reasons for S-300 sales because they won't need to challenge this militarily. Your evidence indicates that they need to, the role of the U.S. needs to be clearly limited. Our working and Solowski evidence is comparative that in order for there to be a developed relationship between the U.S. and the GCC, they need to remain in the region in order to facilitate these types of dialogues. Yes, you have read the conclusion, but our evidence makes all of the comparative claims that you have strategically left out of the affirmative, so you don't solve.
631.
Yeah.
Keep moving back after every speech, expecting to highlight something or something.
is inevitable, neither the world or the status quo or the counterplan. We win the debate because it means the counterplan cannot stop spiraling hostility developing between the U.S. and Iran, making Middle East war inevitable, which is what the disadvantage's impact is. It turns that our Musavian and MaMc evidence trying to solve all proxy wars in the Middle East via good U.S.-GCC relations is like trying to dam up a river with cardboard. The status quo proves Iran and their allies will not back down in proxy conflicts, which means only solving Iranian threat perceptions can prevent war. The affirmative alone is necessary. By incorporating Iran, we lead to the GCC and Iranian cooperation. That's our Freeman evidence, which overcomes the antagonizing and antagonism and low-level proxy wars. Now, even if they win time frame, our uniqueness arguments about war being and I will take this out. You should default to an external impact. They have zero explanation for how GCC lash out would result in a nuclear scenario. The only scenario for escalation is Israeli draw, and our Perez evidence says U.S. antagonism causes Iranian asymmetric responses versus Israel because they don't believe Israel will actually use their nuclear weapons. They conceded opacity in the fog of war makes nuclear use likely. You should prefer evidence because it's from 2015. Now they conceded 3 warrants for why Iranian wars coming into the status quo. First is regime survival. They perceive themselves as backed into a corner. Fears of regime change will prompt retaliatory measures to draw the whole Middle East. Second is regional lash out of U.S.-Iranian tensions exacerbate hostility and embolden Saudi Arabia and Israel as well. That's Musavian. They did not answer this war because it also functions to not unique any impact on the lash out because it proves GCC aggression is the status quo and only the affirmative presents an option to rein them in. That's our Friedman using anti-Gupta evidence. 3, they concede their deterrence doesn't check that the spiral model of conflict is much more applicable. Each side views each other as a revisionist challenge or interprets the other's action in the most hostile light possible, which means if we win that Iran says no to the counterplan, then they have no incentive or belief that the United States is no longer going to engage in regime change, and there's no incentive for other allies to stop antagonizing them in the counterplan. There's one guaranteed piece of offense on the counterplan. They've conceded that U.S.-GCC relations are bad. This was an impact turn on the DA that was straight up dropped in 2 speeches in a row. The plan by causing Saudi Arabia and the GCC to feel insecure prompts them to further relations with Israel. These increased ties will spill over to solve the peace process over Palestine. They conceded on to watch evidence that will inevitably escalate to nuclear use because multiple great powers have an incentive in the conflict. The counterplan cannot solve because it maintains U.S.-GCC cooperation, preventing the GCC from having a motive to expand ties with Israel. This is a nuclear war scenario that only the affirmative can solve, and the DA can't turn because they have no explanation of how a Middle East war between the GCC and Iran would draw on the same actors that a war over Palestine would. They have not even tried to breathe a word on this, which means to default to any affirmative explanation. Now, if we win, Iran says no, we win the debate because it makes the counterplan cannot stop spiraling hostility in Middle East war, making all of their impacts inevitable. Iran says no to the counterplan. 3 reasons. First, regime change. Khomeini banned further negotiations because he perceived them as a mechanism for the U.S. to extend its political and cultural hegemony into Iran in order to topple his Islamic Republic. That's our good enough evidence. Their only response to this is that the counterplan provides a speech. However, why would Khomeini have any incentive to trust the speech? Our plus evidence says that it's a legal ban that is overriding Rouhani's attempts at rapprochement with the United States. Only the affirmative solves. Our Trice evidence says hardliners need U.S. capitulation in the Middle East to be a prerequisite to expand ties. Second is Iran wants accommodation, not cooperation. The counterplan is U.S.-led multilaterals, but Iran wants us to have their role accommodated in the region by having the U.S. withdraw its military presence because the fact that it's on their border means they have to focus diplomatic efforts on countering those military threats rather than engaging in broader-based cooperation with countries like the GCC. That's the 2AC and 1AC pieces of Bardsegard evidence. Our Freeman evidence indicates that you cannot address Iranian threat perceptions unless you get rid of troops on their western border, which means the counterplan, which leaves and maintains our current force posture, causes them to not want to cooperate and perceive the United States as being inevitably antagonistic because it divides the region between good and bad zones and who we are and are not willing to cooperate with. They've conceded their conclusion of the Wyoming article, which indicates that Iran does not want the U.S. to be a part of the forum, which means even if the counterplan is just an attempt by the United States to endorse GCC and Iranian cooperation, the fact that the United States is taking the first step within the counterplan means that they would not want any part of the counterplan. The third solvency deficit is GCC lash out. This has 2 implications. First, it means the counterplan cannot solve an inevitable Middle East war. Second, it proves that the affirmative axis is a unique link term for GCC aggression. Our current presence gives allies license to antagonize Iran because they think that we will back them up. Only withdraw creates the rapprochement between the U.S. and Iran necessary to rein in Saudi and Israeli escalating antagonism. They conceded the external impact levels of Perez card, which I explained on the advantage. Now, they have no explanation for how the counterplan solves regional influence or threat perceptions, which means the permutations to the plan and any non-mutually exclusive parts of the counterplan should solve any reason why the counterplan is good for cooperation. However, we have many reasons why it's not sufficient. DA, I guess. Actually, I have no idea where I put this. So, yeah, read off your computer. But I'm going to talk about the impact debate a little bit first. The argument that the GCC is holding the Middle East together is both not true and just kind of messed up. The GCC is lashing out in the status quo. Proxy warfare in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Syria, and Iraq, and the status quo indicate that there is not peace within the Middle East and the status quo, which means they have no unique scenario for why you would escalate. The Russell evidence I've read is from 2009 does not assume current lash out that's happening now. The GCC states fear withdrawal of the U.S. already. Their link is entirely about perception, which proves only the affirmative's regionalization of security restores commitment by forcing them to internalize the cost of security. If we win any of our uniqueness arguments, it also proves that they would say no to the counterplan because they perceive the U.S.
as already having extricated its security when we have a couple reasons why they're freaked out now. One, the pivot is perceived as the U.S. using its get out of the Middle East free card and has already freaked out Saudi Arabia. Second is the nuclear deal is perceived as the U.S. siding with Iran, which prevents consolidation and rapprochement. Three is no uniqueness from Camp David to the Saudi Arabia, and most of the GCC states didn't even show up because they're pissed off about how Obama has not capitulated to the king's demands. Their only evidence in response to this is just an argument. It's just an argument for why we're currently selling them arms, but if that's true, then they have no presence, link, uniqueness warrant. 4 is their Goldenberg link card is about the status quo. It says, quote, U.S. policymakers have responded to such complaints by insisting that they have no intention of pursuing any broader accommodation. Gulf states view this rhetoric as hollow if not backed up by action. You should prefer our evidence because it's from October 9th and indicates that the GCC is already angry at the United States and already taking security into their own hands. Now, if their uniqueness is about military aid, then the plan would not be able to trigger that link argument. The plan increasing their vulnerabilities argument is a good thing. They've conceded our Gusanti and Gupta evidence that indicates when they have a heightened sense of vulnerability, they're more likely to cooperate with Iran because they perceive that their conventional forces are not good enough, so they would want to secure their states by engaging in accommodation rather than war.
Good debate. Good debate.
Good debate.
of the decision, and then we can talk about the specifics of it. So I voted AF in this debate. I don't think I thought in the 2NR that I thought I guess I thought the time issue. I thought you were heavy on the disad and a little bit light on the warrants as to why the counterplan solves the AF, and so I thought you sort of got behind on the spin or the explanation as to why the counterplan solves the AF. I have a lot clearer and more persuasive explanation from the AF about why Iran would say no, about why about why Iran would say no, and about why the counterplan doesn't solve the AF. And then I think so. Counterplan doesn't solve much of the case. Maybe some. I don't think it solves very much. I also and then coupled with the fact that I think the disad, there are two problems with the disad that I can isolate. One is I think you have some uniqueness problems, and I think that is that's the counterplan's either got to solve most of the case debate, or the parts of the case debate that the counterplan doesn't solve proves that you have massive uniqueness problems on the disad. So if we're going to hell in a handbasket in the squo, then So and I think there are a few things that you could do differently, and I'll get to that in just a sec. But so first problem is uniqueness problems on the disadvantage, and the second problem is this peace process add-on, which I'm not sure you all adequately dealt with throughout the debate. So I'll talk about the case debate first. Like I mentioned earlier, I think they're ahead. I mean, obviously you didn't go to the case debate in the 2NR, but they are ahead, obviously, on specificity of scenarios, all that good stuff, and sort of just winning that things are not good in the squo, and we have there's some bad stuff going down. So I thought I read your Goldenberg evidence and the uniqueness evidence that you read on the disadvantage to try and see if those cards kind of went far enough on that question, like, are things really okay? Are relations okay now? Are they going to be okay going forward as your card is tagged? So the Goldenberg card is okay. I don't think it's as good. Their Trofimov 10-9 evidence is both newer than your card and better. That it just says that, it literally just says they really feel abandoned now. There's never been a point. I'm trying to quote verbatim without having the card in front of me, but it literally says, there's never been a point ever where they've felt as abandoned as they do right now. And that ev is pretty new and rhetorically powerful. So I think those countries feel abandoned in the squo, so uniqueness problem. And then the peace process add-on, the impact turn, impact turn, not an add-on, but or either way, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I don't have much of a coherent arg from the neg, and if there is a coherent answer, I'm not sure what it is in the 2NR, because at one point you sort of quickly say we internal link turn the Israel scenario, but I'm not sure why. I'm not sure how that happens, and maybe that's just me not understanding. But I think you need a little bit more time and emphasis and kind of oomph on that argument to beat that back. And so as per the rhetoric of the 2AR, I sort of define that. I'm not sure I buy that that's an external impact, because it's all a Middle East war one way or another, right? And so you've isolated at least the peace process advantage as external to the rest of the stuff that happens on the case debate. I'm not sure that that's true, but I think you all need to say that as well. It'd be like, it's not really an external impact. It's all about the Middle East. It's all about a Middle East conflict and those countries fighting each other. But it's at least sort of explained as an external impact, and it's a war over Palestine, which I guess, but that's in the Middle East. But at least you're trying to do work to differentiate that. So the peace process impact turn coupled with some uniqueness problems sort of hurt you there. I don't think you have good enough ev on the counter plan that says that. You may. I think maybe the ev on the counter plan is better than the. I think this was a coverage issue, not necessarily like an ev issue. But so I just think you need to sort of dig in on the warrants as to why the counter plan, why the actors in the region would say yes to the counter plan, because they're pretty strong throughout the debate on, particularly in the 1AR, which I thought was a really, really good speech. Particularly in the warrants, multiple levels of warrants coming out in the 1AR about why they say no, and so I think you've got to dig in a little bit there. So I don't know. That's sort of the quick nutshell version. I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah. So obviously, time allocation, big issue, because my time was I've been counting.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Where can you think of for me to make up time on the I
think you could be.
Heavy at the top.
I think you were top heavy on the disad. I think I mean you've got to obviously do the work that it comes quicker than the AF and it's bigger than the AF and all that, but do that real quick and sort of burn through that stuff. And then I thought your layering of warrants and your explanation and stuff at the top of the disad is good and much appreciated, but at the same time it definitely trades off with getting those warranted layered arguments in about why they say yes to the counterplan, which is equally important. So I think if you were going to redo this 2NR at some point, go through that overview at the top of the disad and find out what's redundant, because there is definitely some redundancy, and just burn through that stuff quick, because you've got to cover the line by line anyway, obviously. And so I thought the overview at the top of the disad was a little bit long, and then just a better answer to the impact turn, I think, and you're in business. But yeah, it was just too much time on the disad, not enough time on the counterplan.
But as for
yeah.
the 2 and C explanations of the counterplan, do you think that doing more of what I did there would have put us in a good position, or more Ev?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would like. So maybe I lied. Maybe it is an evidentiary question. I mean, I read your solvency evidence for the counterplan. I guess I would like one piece of Ev to latch onto that's just like, oh, they'll say yes, that Iran will go along with it. Would go along with it in a world where we still had troops and carriers and all that stuff there. Because I think that's the key distinction. It's just like, okay, all your evidence says they might be willing to do it, but maybe their Ev is much better on they're not going to do right. I mean, that's all hot air until we pull some troops out or pull the carriers out or something. So
perhaps the 2 and C would be better served to jettison T and just read more evidence on the counterplan.
yeah, maybe yeah, because I didn't think you were getting much traction on the TR. I mean, I understand why it's in the debate, because I mean, just for time trade-off reasons and because it's me, and and you never know. So yeah, I would maybe boot the TARG and dig in on the counterplan a little bit better. The other option is, I thought you had decent arguments on the case debate in the 1NC. I mean, another option might be to just maybe just boot the counterplan and go for the disad and the case and just read all your cards and roll the dice. But then obviously you got to have real good answers on the case, and you've really got to spend a lot of time and effort there. And I don't know how many more of these case cards you had. Maybe that was it. I don't know. But yeah, that definitely would have changed the trajectory of the debate. But I didn't think it was bad. So no one got below a 29. This was my kind of debate. Very, very good. I appreciated what happened in this debate. So everyone got really good points. Lots of props to the 1AR. I thought that was the best speech in the debate, and your points were rewarded accordingly. I thought the 2AR was real good too, except you were a little bit reliant on the stuff he was. You know what I'm referencing there. So a tenth of a speaker point. So be a little bit more organized for the 2AR. But yeah, that was good. So the one thing that sort of oddly gave me a little bit of pause was the way I understood you explaining the permutation in the 2NR, and I hope I got this right, because I think that sort of I think it could have changed the decision. My understanding is that you did not go for the permutation; rather, you used that argument to prove that just negotiating while troops and the carriers and stuff were in place not sufficient to solve the AF. Which I hope I got that right, but because I mean, they do make the argument that perm is severance, and I don't have you answering that in the 2AR. But if you're not going for the perm, I get why you're not answering that.
Honestly, I just thought it's like perm, non-mutually exclusive parts definitionally cannot be severance.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But I think you've got. But I think you've got to say that.
Honestly, just like just extend a perm in case there's some weird CP.
Fair enough. And I think in the 2NR, yeah, and in the 2NR, to be fair, I mean, the reason I didn't pull the trigger on this is because in the 2NR you're like, that's severance, but that's all you said. You're not like, that's a voting issue, so.
I only made the severance arguments on permutation.
Okay, fair enough. But since you grouped them together in the two, I was like, I don't know what's happening there. So so there you go. Don't. So I guess the lesson on that is be meticulous and don't leave any of that. Don't leave any of those questions up to me or to the judge, because I'm not sure another judge might not have resolved that a little bit differently. So anyway, I thought it was a really good debate, enjoyable.
Did you even make a perm not mutually exclusive argument? Because I thought you made perm do both. Perm do with every other permutation,
The
and
only
then
perm in the 1AR was...
perm do counterplan.
No,
And then
I said perm combo planks, which either turned into perm.
Okay, so it was some spin in the 1AR. Okay.
Yes, Neo glide. Which is usually my job.
Yeah, perfect.
It's on
Thank
camera.
you.
Yeah, good luck, everyone.